So again, welcome to another Wealth interview. Today we have with us the co-founder of Swedish House Mafia, and I know from now it's going to be what could only be thought of as a very delicious interview. Sir, Mr. Akash Sethi, welcome and thank you so much for doing this with us.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
All right, so I'm going to directly get to it. In our research for Swedish House Mafia, we learned that the journey of SHM started at the back of a Tata Nano. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. So actually, this entire idea came about at a dinner. So my sister-in-law was the baker, and I was, pushing her to do this for a long time to get into the baking sector. And at the time, which was almost about a decade ago, the market was quite underserved in Bombay, at least. So I had, in fact, even outlined a few stores and some locations, but she didn't want to do anything, like a cafe format, and we really hadn't thought of that. And I was in Boston for a few years. She was in New York, so we both are pretty attuned to the food truck culture, and there was nothing of the sort in the country at the time. So we said, why don't we bring a slice of that back to India? And that's how the idea came about of a mobile sort of food truck concept initially. What happened was there was no regulation for this. There was no sort of permissions for food trucks in the country at the time. There was nothing. It was a gray area. So what we decided to do was we said, in fact, me and a few friends had given them, my sister-in-law and my brother, a Tata Nano as a fun wedding present, which was lying unused. So we said, why don't we bake it at home and then send it via the Nano and use social media. At the time, it was only Facebook and Twitter. Instagram had just about started and still not fully commercialized. So we used this, and it'll be a fun idea to sort of just send out stuff you're making at home, keep it anonymous, so you have very honest feedback from people, and let's just have some fun with it. So it started off purely from a very passionate and fun perspective, and then yeah.
Amazing, quite a journey. You spoke about passion, fun. You spoke about using social media at a very early stage. SHM has that brand image of being trendy, being youth centric. How did that image help SHM grow as a brand? And how did it create a buzz in the media?
So I think it helped a lot. The entire, again, we both are young people. We knew the current, we were echoing the tastes and preferences of the culture, of the youth culture in the country anyway. So in fact, even if our name, if you look at it, is a play on that famous house collective called Swedish House Mafia.
Yeah.
Now, naming something that is that young and relevant was obviously going to attract that sort of millennial and crowd in the first place. Also, the medium which we were marketing, or at least talking to our customers, was social media. Now, typically the at the time, today it's maybe demographics is a little different, but back then the demographic of Twitter and Facebook, etc., was the younger generation, the younger crowd, people, teenagers, people in their 20s, 30s, and so there was this resonance with that demographic, and even our products. If you look at it, it's not your Indian sweets; it's a Western product, a Western dessert that really wasn't in the country in a large fashion coming into it. So there was a mix of both the product, the concept, the name, and the way we marketed all were geared towards targeting that entire, 18 to 40 bracket.
Right.
Right. So you spoke about that target towards a particular demographic, and you spoke about how that name came about and where you found that culture from that you wanted to bring to the Indian audience. So was there any formal sort of market research which was conducted before you decided to start this, or did you just go as you went along the journey
No,
and learned about this demographic?
sorry, to be honest, there was no formal market research. What we were very cognizant of was that there was no uh, major, you know, uh, Western dessert player as such. It was fragmented. There were home bakers a few at the time. There was just an influx of a couple of cafes. If I recall, there was Theobroma that was already existing. Then you had your, older players who were in the market already, your Havmores and your Birdies and all that. But there was no real, fun young brand that had entered market. And so we had done a bit of research. Not, like I said, we didn't really do any aggressive research on that front. We were sort of assessing the market out. More of the research came actually during the time of when we launched the Nano. And talking about, we used different locations, different products, and we collected that data quite aggressively. So when we decided to launch our brick and mortar, by then we had active research that we ourselves had conducted over the last 1 year into which markets were performing, which products did well, and in fact, that's why we stuck to cookies, is because what we realized was with the Nano days, we had given everything from cupcakes to swirls to cookies. But our cookies performed the best in every single segment, every single market. They were the outperformers. And so we had that data to obviously help us. And when we launched our brick and mortar, yes, there was a bit more research done into it. We sort of tried to understand, the larger biscuit market, and then, a smaller segment of that, which is the cookie segment, the cookie market itself. We did some market sizing, who the main players, what the market share of the main players are, what the main distribution channels are, all those aspects. And yes, so there was more formal research done when we entered the second phase of our expansion or growth.
Right. So all of us at Welfare are big fans of Swedish cookies and also the quality that it offers. My question is that how essential it is for a business to survive only based on its quality of the product. Is that the only factor, or are there other factors too which help in its survival?
I think for that, you need to answer one question before, which is, what is the outcome or what is the end goal of the business? If it's scale, then of course, I don't think quality is the only thing. If you want to scale, there are other factors that come into it, right? With more scale, there's more factors to look into. You have price. One of the major things, in my opinion, is distribution. In fact, it was one of the main challenges that we faced when we wanted to go from one city to multiple, is that how do we get our cookie dough from one location to the other location, because it has to be temperature controlled. That we realized was the cold supply chain in the country was very backward, very expensive. So yes, we have a good product, but does it make a good scalable business? If you're one single outlet and you don't want to really grow from that and say, look, I want to have one outlet, I want to have pull customers to me, then yes, your product is everything. There's no other factors that you need to look at, because you need to ensure consistency of product year in, year out. And therefore you have your Yazdani bakeries who are 150 years old, and places like that, like a Trishna, for example, which is an institution in the city for seafood, and people who come in from all different parts of the country or globally will come and try the food there, but they operate out of a single outlet. But now, if you're looking at scale, how do I ensure that if I'm in Bombay, if I'm in Bangalore, in Delhi, is it just product? Yes, of course, that plays a part, but there's of course aspects to it. As I mentioned to you, pricing and distribution are two very important aspects that you need to look into when you're scaling and expanding.
Great. So the other thing is that marketing has definitely been like the strong suit of Swedish House Mafia. With people choosing the next, when you all began, right, with this whole food truck culture, and with people choosing the next destination of where these cookies were brought to them, you said that you collected data quite aggressively. Did it also, in sort of hindsight, help you very cleverly determine where you'd sell the most cookies and move there to optimize sales? And since then, that data that you've collected, how did that translate into helping you decide where you wanted to open your brick and mortar stores? Has it helped you translate that data into brick and mortar store decisions?
To a large extent, yes. At least within Bombay, we knew the pockets that really performed for us. So Lower Parel was one of our best performing markets. Lower Parel, Breach Candy, Bandra, which is why our first 3 outlets were all within that area. Because when the Nano went out there, we did tremendous sales. We had long lines, we had long queues, we had the most engagement when it was going to those areas. So we knew for a fact that it would perform. So it wasn't, just a luck of the draw. It was a planned, structured expansion in that aspect. Outside of the Nano, when we even looked at expanding outside of Bombay, it was where we were getting engagement on social media. So we were able to understand where our followers are, what distribution of the followers are there. So how many are there in Delhi, how many are there in Bangalore, Calcutta, Pune, etc. Now, of course, that's the other aspect. It was Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore being our 3 main markets. But for Delhi, we didn't find the right locations, the right partner. So also those factors come into it when you're expanding. But yes, we were very cognizant of which areas would do better for us, both in terms of actual sales on the floor, which was in Bombay, plus our engagement online from customers outside the city to understand which areas would perform for us.
Amazing, quite good. After a few years of operating online, as you said, you finally took a plunge in brick and mortar stores, that aspect of doing business. So once you made that transition, how complex did business actually get for you? What all changed from getting online to brick and mortar?
So no, actually, we weren't online. When we were at selling from the Nano, it was technically marketed via social media, but it was still very much a physical sale at the food truck itself or at the Nano itself. We weren't doing any online sales at the time. But yes, the transition was tremendous because it's very different running something from your house, baking it once a week and sending it out, to setting up a single store and then multiple stores and then having more employees and having, a central office. So it was a complete change in dynamic. It became a real business, from a passion project to a real business when the stores opened. Everything from ensuring, regulatory compliances, forming your companies, all those aspects, to ensuring that how do you remain profitable both at the outlet level as well as the corporate level. We realized there were corporate expenses so when you even when you have a brick and mortar outlets, it's much easier with 1 or 2 outlets. It becomes increasingly more difficult with more outlets. Why? Is because as you scale, there are certain corporate expenses that get added. So there'll be accountants, there'll be area managers, there'll be an office, so there's that rent. You have a central marketing budget. So all those aspects, you need to account for. So at the store level, we had, a few employees. We had to ensure that, these are fixed costs, these are variable costs. Are we, profitable per outlet? We're deploying so much money per outlet. Will it give an adequate ROI? If we have a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease, we need to not only ensure that the capital expenditure that has been deployed here, we recover that and make a profit. So there were a lot of aspects to it. Then the operational angles come into it, about wastage, about any other aspects of that. So to ensure that there's no theft, there's no making sure there's training that's done properly at the floor. Because when you're when it's from the house, it's you are talking to your customer directly. But now my employee at the counter is now the ambassador of the company. He's interacting with my customers. So how do we ensure that every customer who walks through our doors has a seamless experience, who has a standard experience, whether he goes to Beach Candy, Bandra or Bangalore? How do we ensure that there's that standardization of product across multiple locations? When I say standardization of product, I mean not just the cookie that you eat, but the way it's served to you, the quality of the service you get from the time you enter my door to the time you leave, in terms of hygiene, service quality, product quality, all those aspects. And so we had to do multiple, system audits, mystery audits, all those aspects to ensure that every customer leaves satisfied.
See, that's very interesting, because that brings me very literally to my next question, and I want to take it as micro as possible, so as to speak. Is that you mentioned all these factors, but most customers look at the product they're buying and they take the price of it at face value, right? For them, it's
Absolutely.
the price of the cookie, right?
Absolutely.
Which is priced at some X amount, and then they decide if it's too much of a premium or they want to buy it. But on the
Correct.
entrepreneurial level, what are the considerations that go into place before you price that one cookie, right? And Can you tell us very roughly, of course, the breakup into how that cookie is priced to factor in for all these things that you mentioned that are sort of intangible to the consumer?
Right. So it's a great question. In fact, that's one of the main issues I think that F&B companies face is that when people look at price, they say, "Oh my God, it's 10 rupees for a packet of Lay's, so expensive, etc." But they don't realize that there are a lot of factors that go behind the scenes in producing a product. Now, the initial pricing of any product typically you want to adhere. So in F&B, especially let's say in different verticals, so in the brick and mortar vertical, through many years of decades of experience from different brands, there are now somewhat accepted guidelines and standards in terms of what your gross margin should be, what your food cost should be. And so that's the first benchmark of pricing, right? To you, this is what my food cost should ideally be. If I reverse calculate, this is what I should price my product at. After that, you have other considerations. Now, at least in our industry, I'll talk, as I said, very specifically to us. One of the major killers is rent. Um, for you, it's very easy for you to walk down the road to your closest SHM outlet and pick up a cookie and a coffee and say, so convenient. But rents are very expensive in Bombay, very expensive in Delhi. So that's a very large expense. It's one of the biggest killers for the F&B industry because it's a fixed head. It's a fixed expense. And it was one of the main reasons that impacted businesses even during COVID is that because being a fixed expenditure, without having that footfall, you're struggling. Outside of that, you have a host of salaried employees who need to work behind the scenes to deliver your product, both in terms of whether it be delivery or baking at the back end. There's the entire employees. There's your packaging cost. And then there's cost of maintaining that quality. Today you expect me to give the same quality again and again, which I will absolutely give. But there's a cost to it. In my previous answer, you heard me talk about mystery audits. Now, what are those? It's basically saying that we typically hire external consultants with a questionnaire saying that I need you to go into my outlets at random intervals. So maybe on a weekday afternoon, weekend evening, weekday night, order a cookie in this aspect, ask these questions to the counter staff, and you're acting like an average consumer. And when we collate the data and see, okay, fine, this is the issue that we're facing, this is what's happening, this is what's going wrong at the service level, this was not complied with, this was not complied with, and we try and standardize it as much as possible. On the surface, it seems very easy and very hunky-dory. Actually, when you peel the layers, you realize there's a lot that goes into it to ensure that level of quality in premium products.
Right. So if we observe very closely, the last couple of years has seen the rise of delivery aggregators like Zomato and Swiggy. My question is, has that impacted the reach of SHM in a good way? And moreover, we also know that SHM has an online portal so that their customers can order from the portal directly. Does that increase the reach of SHM per city?
Look, I think I'm going to tackle both separately. I think the first part's a little more complex. Even before Swiggy and Zomato, we did very good deliveries. A lot of business came in from there as well. The good thing was margins were with us. With Swiggy and Zomato, it absolutely has given a platform to younger brands, smaller brands to be discovered. So yes, there's definitely a platform where there's more visibility and discoverability. In terms of reach, even back then, we were still, delivering to that radius of, 3 to 5 miles. That hasn't changed really. But yes, the reach has increased because there were a lot of customers who probably wouldn't have heard of us or who wouldn't have seen us on Google or wouldn't have, heard from their friends or family about us. And so, yes, it absolutely has increased the reach, but it's also made it more competitive. So back then, there were fewer brands who were trying to be discovered. Now there's a whole host of brands that it's very easy to list on these platforms. So the barriers to entry are minimal. So, every couple of weeks, you have a new player on the market trying to do something different. And so what affects a brand? So in F&B, typically it becomes very difficult because unlike other industries, let me give you an example of, let's say, your face cream or your beauty creams or, hair care products. Typically, if you like a specific soap or shampoo or cream, you'll order that again and again. So there's a long, there's a frequency of consumption and a longer customer life cycle. With food, even if you like something, you sometimes want to try something new. So you may like, let's say, SHM cookie, but yeah, this Sunday, let me try something new. Let me try something that's different. What's new in the market? Let me explore. And you might come back to me a week later or 2 weeks later, but I've lost that business for that week or those 2 weeks. So yes, they definitely have increased the reach, but it's also made it more difficult to keep the frequency as high. With our own online platform, no question. It was earlier for the people to order outside the country. They would write to us on Facebook or Instagram or email, and we would execute the order, but it was a process, right? You first email, we respond, and then we send you a payment link. Today, with our website, we are delivering across the country. We've delivered to more than 300 cities now. And, I'll give you an example of Diwali. We had orders shipped out, I'm talking about large Diwali hampers shipped out to different parts of Bihar. Now, I was never going to open an outlet there. There's just not that much depth of consumption. But because of my website, there's a person in far-flung parts of the country has access and has reach to my product. So there's no question that moving digital has been, a great shift for us and has helped us be discovered in all parts of the country.
So that's fantastic, right? But that also brings me to another challenge that you face in this F&B space, especially not being a retail sort of something that you can put in stores, right?
Right.
And you have this hybrid model where there's online deliveries and then there's in-store purchasing. And you spoke about this briefly in one of your previous answers, is you measuring wastage. And that has to be a huge issue since these are essentially resources and materials that might spoil very quickly. I'm assuming the shelf life isn't very good. So how does that play as a factor in, calculating? You have to be very accurate in calculating the amount of sales you generate in order to determine the materials that you'll use to, create these products. So how do you factor that in, and how accurate have you managed to be in that space?
So the good thing, there's a lot of tech now in the F&B industry, a lot of players who have a lot of seamless integration of your back-end processes to your front-end. So one of the technologies that we use, we have everything from our recipes to our inventory, both semi-finished and finished, and sold, integrated from our central kitchen to every outlet. So it's pretty good because what happens is, yes, initially in the first month or so, there's a bit of wastage, but what we tend to see is patterns. So we tend to understand that on a specific weekday, on a specific hour, what is the typical volume of each SKU that is sold. Once we have a broad general understanding of the consumption pattern for a specific area, we only bake it fresh. So 2 reasons. One is the customers getting the freshest possible product. So there's quality assurance. And number 2, it reduces wastage. We have a benchmark that wastage can't go above a certain level at any given outlet and at the central level. But technology has made it a lot easier for us. I can tell you today that on a Monday between 3 and 4, what's the average number of chocolate chip cookies sold? On a Saturday night, how many are sold? So then we plan accordingly. So we typically do maybe a bit of a buffer with every hour, and then we bake accordingly. And so wastage is fairly minimal. That's fine.
Okay, so let's talk about COVID now. 23rd of March, India went into the lockdown, its first lockdown, and F&B industry took a major hit. And some aspects of F&B industry are still trying to recover to their pre-COVID levels. How has SHM been impacted by COVID, and what measures were taken to ensure that SHM survives the adversity of the lockdown?
So absolutely, COVID threw not just F&B, but I think every industry into a tailspin. Um, yes, we were impacted very, very badly. I think there's still a road to recovery left. For F&B especially, as I said earlier, there's a lot of costs involved with running a specific, any outlets. And so our biggest issue was rents. We had no business, stores were shut, and landlords typically hold all the power because they have the deposits. They have a lot more negotiating power than the tenants do. So it has impacted us in locations where landlords weren't being very understanding of the general business situation environment. We had to shut our stores down because it wasn't possible to incur losses month after month with no real end in sight at the time. We didn't know how long lockdown would go on for. We didn't know how long it would take for business to recover. The rents were expensive, sales were minimal. So we obviously moved a lot to delivery. At the time, the website, thank God it was there because it did very well for us. But we also realized that moving forward, I think the age of brick and mortar was anyway, coming to a plateau in terms of with the aggregators, etc. It was becoming an unviable model if you had too many outlets. So we had anyway in the pipeline started working on our retail line of cookies, so prepackaged FMCG products. And we are midway through that right now. We're going to launch that into market very soon. So it made us realign our priorities in terms of where we want to deploy more capital today. How we see us as a company 5 years from now. Are we going to be a brick and mortar chain, or will we move on to our next phase of expansion, which is going to be predominantly digital and offline retail, which is, your stores, your modern trade, general trade stores. And so it gave us a time to think, step back and say, okay, this pivot was a long time coming. Maybe now's the right time, given that there's going to be a complete shift in consumer pattern and behavior. So it definitely altered our expansion plans. Prior to COVID, we had charted out a pretty aggressive expansion plan across the country. We had about 12 cities targeted over the next 14 to 16 months. That has obviously now been revised to about only 5 cities over the next 12 months. And then, of course, we'll take it quarter by quarter. But we do want to deploy more money and more capital towards our digital platform as well as our FMCG product push.
Okay. So the dessert, cake and cookie industry has many players today, along with SHM being one of the leading players in the same industry. How does SHM plan to remain relevant and hold the leading position in this industry for years to come in the future?
It's an interesting question. That's one of the things that I think companies in the F&B sector have to keep on innovating with new products, not forgetting why they're famous. So we will always be true to our, what made us big, made us popular. And our cookies will always form a bulk of our business. But over and above that, just like we have introduced new products into the pipeline, like brownies and cakes, biscotti and various things, we want to try and increase, our consumer base, people who may not like cookies or brownies. So we want to get into the big good sections, croissants, muffins, etc. And keep on innovating in terms of product, both in categories as well as flavor profiles. And I think that's the only way for us to stay relevant. Apart from that, innovative distribution, strategies, as I said, digital's open up an entire world for us in terms of accessing a whole new market. So being relevant in terms of our ads online, targeting the right people, ensuring that they are seeing us, ordering from us, a bit of both. And then I said also with our new vertical, I think being able to deliver, packaged cookie, which is a larger market, and add more SKUs in that vertical.
Right. So that new vertical that you spoke about, brings me to my final question, which is essentially your foray into FMCG, which we all know if there is one sector that can be thought of as the most competitive sector within F&B, that would probably be the FMCG sector. What are the changes that you think you'll have to make when you're shifting or when you're creating this new product? That's a shift from gourmet to sort of FMCG in terms of pricing and placement, because you can expect the same cookie to be placed next to another cookie that obviously might not taste as good, might not be as premium, but might be priced at half the cost. So how does that SHM cookie manage to still garner sales with the right price point and with the right changes? So what are you looking at to change while you move into FMCG?
So great question. I think the three biggest changes for us in this new line would be, number one, as you said, pricing. So when you enter that market and such a large audience, our gourmet pricing will not be able to scale. It will not work. And so we are reworking those aspects of the product. But of course, when we have to then be more competitive, you can't use the same premium quality ingredients. So use the ingredients or bake it fresh. So we will obviously modify the way the cookie tastes slightly in terms of giving it a different feel. It will still be complying with all our quality guidelines. We will ensure it's the best product out there. And lastly, shelf life. When you're buying it from my store, it's baked fresh and you're consuming it, within a few days. But in FMCG, I can't, distribution is too expensive to bake fresh. So we have to have a long shelf life of about 6 months. So we can target, again, the entire country. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult. So, increased shelf life, reduced price, and a slight change in taste would be the main points when it comes to FMCG. And I'm not talking about it'll be a similar chocolate chip cookie. We're working on a whole different recipe, that complies with. So we've done our research. The Indian consumer likes a little crunchier, they don't like the soft baked cookies when it comes to packaged. So working on a line like that, which has that crunch to it, has a bite to it. It will be slightly different to our existing cookie, but it'll still be amazing nonetheless.
Right. So that brings us to the end of this fantastic interview. Once again, Mr. Akash Sethi, thank you so much for being a part of this,
Thank you so much for having me, guys. It was a pleasure. Some great questions. I love chatting with you all.
Thank you so much, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.